Welcome to our next chapter in general psychology. Today we're going to talk about motivation, those forces that move and alter our behavior. There's a lot of things that motivate us, some of them simple, some of them complex, some of them interesting, and some of them scary. But any force out in the world that somehow changes the way you move, changes the way you think, changes the way you feel, that is a motivator. It could be something as small as I'm hungry to something as large as I'm going to change my life, go back to school, get a brand new career. At the most basic level, we can talk about motivation as an instinct, that primitive force that drives us in different directions. It's not a bad place to start. And for one, all animal life seems to operate with some level of instincts. We said even babies have reflexes that come from sign stimuli that are set into motion based on the different stimuli the world brings. When you see the squirrel hoarding nuts for the winter, the bird starting to fly south as the temperature gets cold, that is a change in behavior, but in this case it's motivated by instinct. And while we might can use instinct to talk about some of the higher purposes, the higher movements, the higher motivators or drives that are out there, ultimately instinct isn't enough. It's not good to start talking about the complex versions of these behaviors. And I've put some examples up there that certainly have a shared biological past, an evolutionary past. But as we try to explain why we do them, especially today, it's not enough to say, well, we're just wired to do these things at the end. It's certainly not at an instinctual level. After all, you're listening to this video, you're taking a class, you got out of bed and went to work for some of you. Those are things that are beyond instinct, but you were still motivated to do those. So another way of looking at motivation is through still a simple lens, but is more robust, and that's through the lens of drives and needs. A drive is any aroused state. Remember, the word arousal means a stimulation or excitement of the brain and body. A good example of a drive is hunger or thirst or sleep, or sleepy we would say. A need is a deficiency, something that your body or brain craves but you don't currently have enough of. So in this case, I used examples for food. When you tell me you're hungry, what you might be saying is, my body is deficient of food. That's the need. I need energy. I need fuel. And so your body changes. Your focus changes. We call it a drive. Specifically, we call this one hunger. That's a drive. Sleepy, that's a drive. Thirsty, that's a drive. And all that we're talking about is we change into this drive state and then move in the direction, that's motivation, move in a direction that will make the drive go away, to basically feel the need. We call this drive reduction theory. It has our biological buzzword, homeostasis, a return to balance. So we can talk about a lot of our motivation in terms of homeostasis, the idea that I'm sleepy because I'm deficient of energy, deficient of rest. I need to do that. Once I get the rest, that drive disappears. Now I'm homeostasis. I'm back to normal, back to balance. So there's a lot of our behaviors, at least in day-to-day life, that fit quite nicely in this drive reduction theory. Now, like with Chapter 5, when I taught you about primary reinforcers and secondary reinforcers, there are primary drives and secondary drives, and guess what? Same exact definition. To be in the primary category means that you are somehow unlearned. These are typically biological impulses or biological needs and drives that we share. For example, food that we've already talked about and we'll talk about later when we talk about hunger, thirst, sleepiness, and yes, even sex and sexual attraction as part of the primary camp, since that's something wired into human organisms. Secondary drives are those things that motivate us, that move us, that do not exist naturally, that we have to learn. If money is motivating, awesome. But that's something that you have to learn. It does not exist in nature. Now, earlier I used that word arousal, and that's our first real look at drives that we all share. All humans seem wired to find certain levels of arousal, to be stimulated physically and neurologically. Remember, it's not sexual arousal. I know we sometimes use that as slang, arousal, to mean that. But that's just one of infinite number of types of arousal. Anything on this planet or beyond that stimulates brain or body, that can be considered arousing. As I said, humans are wired to do this, as many animals are, and it makes sense. I mean, imagine if a baby was not wired to be naturally curious, to explore. Well, if that wasn't the case, they would never learn, they would never grow, they would never absorb the relevant information to live. Now, the thing about arousal, though, is it changes, not only day to day, but hour to hour. Every day we're trying to move up and down the scale to find the optimum level of arousal. Right now, at this point, as you're listening to me, some of you have music going and things in the background. Others of you have quieted off the world because it's too much. You want to focus on my voice. So sometimes we want less arousal. Sometimes we want more arousal. It depends on our specific circumstance, what's happening today, what's happening this hour. Maybe I'm typing my notes and then I get bored and I say, well, I'm going to watch something on YouTube for a few minutes. All right, now I've got that. I'm at my optimum level. Homeostasis achieved. There we go. Now, the Yerkes-Dodson law has to do not with the type of arousal like we talked about, but instead offers the idea of what's the perfect amount of arousal. And the idea is a moderate amount. A moderate level of arousal seems to be where humans do our best work. For example, imagine that you have a job that doesn't challenge you. It's super easy, super simple, doesn't use most of the skills that you've learned. That may seem nice, but as most humans report, the easier the job, there's a point where we get bored, we get tired, we get lazy because it's just not challenging us. But of course, if you go too far, if the job's too difficult, too much stress, too much, then we simply cannot perform at our best. So we're always looking, according to the Yerkes-Dodson law, for that moderate level of arousal. All right, we'll stop here, take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to look at hunger, which for humans and other animals is one of the most common forms of motivation. See you then.